A heart beneath the badge. The afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the suburban streets as Officer Jordan J.D. Daniels cruised slowly down Willow Street in his patrol car. Willow Street was the heart of Maplewood, a small, tight-knit town where J.D. knew everyone by name. It was a neighborhood filled with children playing, elderly couples tending to gardens, and teens hanging out by the convenience store, their laughter echoing through the air. J.D. was a seasoned officer, having served Maplewood for almost 15 years. The people trusted him not only as a protector but as someone who genuinely cared. He wasn't just the law around here. He was a neighbor, a friend. Today, however, his peaceful patrol felt slightly different, weighed by a sense of unease he couldn't quite shake. As J.D. rounded a familiar corner, his gaze landed on an unusual sight. At the far end of the street, a young boy, around 12 or 13 years old, was clutching something in his arms, ducking swiftly into an alley. J.D.'s instincts kicked in, prompting him to slow down and assess the situation. It wasn't just the hurried way the boy moved that piqued his interest, but the way he seemed to be protecting his cargo at all costs. J.D. parked his car nearby, stepping out with caution. He took quiet strides toward the alley's entrance, scanning the area around him. He could hear soft, almost rhythmic sounds, a gentle whimpering that was barely audible over the ambient noise of the city. He approached carefully, not wanting to alarm the boy, until he was finally close enough to see him. The sight took J.D.'s breath away. In the boy's arms were two babies, no older than 6 months, bundled up in a way that suggested he'd done his best to keep them warm despite the slight chill in the air. J.D. quickly noted that the babies were African American, while the boy was white, with tousled brown hair and oversized clothes that didn't seem to fit him properly. Taking a deep breath, J.D. softened his posture, his voice calm as he addressed the boy. "Hey there, son," J.D. said, keeping his distance. "I'm Officer Daniels, but you can call me J.D. You look like you're holding some precious cargo there." The boy's eyes flickered with uncertainty, his arms tightening protectively around the babies. J.D. could see the worry etched in his young face and the determination that held him steady, even in his exhaustion. "I'm not here to hurt you," J.D. added gently, sensing the boy's fear. "I just want to make sure you and those little ones are okay. Would it be all right if we talked for a minute?" The boy's eyes darted between J.D. and the alleyway, assessing the risks. J.D. took this moment to carefully lower himself into a squat, getting on the boy's level. "What's your name?" J.D. asked, his voice soft. The boy hesitated, but something in J.D.'s voice seemed to chip away at his reluctance. "Eli," he replied, barely above a whisper. "My name's Eli. These are my brother and sister, Emma and Elijah." He paused, then added, "I take care of them." J.D.'s heart squeezed as he took in the young boy's words. He noticed the way Eli held the babies with the care and tenderness of someone far beyond his years, as though his entire purpose was to keep them safe. "They're lucky to have you, Eli," J.D. said, his eyes kind. "I can see that you're doing your best to take care of them, but you must be tired and hungry, aren't you?" Eli bit his lip, glancing down at the babies. They were sleeping soundly in his arms, their tiny faces relaxed in the comfort of his embrace. "Yeah," he admitted, his voice filled with quiet resolve. "But they need me. They need someone who cares." J.D. felt a surge of admiration for this young boy. Here was a kid who had likely been through more than J.D. could imagine, yet he was doing everything in his power to protect the two vulnerable infants in his care. J.D. could feel the raw intensity of Eli's bond with the babies, a bond that went beyond blood, one forged from necessity and love. "What if I told you I could help you all?" J.D. asked gently. "Maybe get you something to eat and a warm place to rest. No strings attached, just to make sure you're all okay." Eli's face twisted in conflict, but he glanced down at the babies in his arms and then back up at J.D. The hope in his eyes was mingled with caution. I can't go back," he murmured. "They don't want us there. They don't care about us. His voice cracked, and his shoulders slumped slightly as he continued. They treat them, my brother and sister, like they're nothing. GD's heart broke as he listened, his respect for the boy growing even stronger. He had heard rumors about certain institutions, whispers of places where some children were treated poorly based on their background or appearance. It was a reality he had spent years trying to change, but nothing had prepared him to face it here, so close to home. "You're safe with me, Eli," JD said, his voice filled with conviction. "No one's going to take you anywhere you don't want to go. Let's just get you all somewhere safe first, okay?" Eli's grip on the babies loosened slightly, his expression softening as he nodded. JD extended a hand, guiding them toward his patrol car parked a few feet away. He opened the back door and gently helped Eli and the babies inside, making sure they were comfortable. As he closed the door, JD took a moment to gather his thoughts. There were so many questions, but he knew the answers would come in time. Right now, the priority was ensuring that Eli and the two little ones were safe and cared for. Shelter in the storm. The drive back to the station was quiet. JD kept glancing in the rearview mirror, watching Eli as he held the babies close, his face unreadable yet layered with worry. Despite JD's assurances, he could see Eli's body was tense, his gaze constantly shifting between JD and the car's locked doors, his instincts still ready to protect. When they arrived at the station, JD guided them through the side entrance. It was quieter here, with fewer eyes to worry about, and JD wanted to make sure Eli felt safe before he shared anything more about his situation. Inside, JD led them to a private room typically used for community outreach, outfitted with a couch, a small table, and even a few toys tucked into a corner for visiting children. He brought a blanket from a storage closet, draping it over Eli and the babies before sitting across from them with a comforting smile. "I'll be right back," JD assured Eli, his voice calm. "I'm just grabbing some food and a bottle for the little ones. I won't be long." Eli nodded but kept his eyes on JD, his expression as guarded as ever. JD's heart twisted as he turned to leave, already making a mental list of essentials to gather. Down the hall, he met his colleague, Officer Lena Hayes, who immediately picked up on his worry. "Everything all right, GG?" Lena asked, her eyes soft with concern. He sighed, running a hand over his face. "I'm not sure yet. Just found a boy, Eli, with 2 babies. He says they're his brother and sister. But Lena, the way he's holding on to them, it's like they're his lifeline. Something's happened to them, and I need to figure out what." Lena nodded, her expression growing serious. "Want me to grab some baby formula and diapers? I can run down to the store." "Thank you," JD replied with a grateful nod. "I'll get some snacks for Eli, maybe something warm to eat. Let's meet back here in 5 minutes." While Lena headed out, JD quickly made his way to the break room, filling a tray with hot cocoa, soup, and a few apples for Eli. He also grabbed a stuffed bear from the station's Lost and Found, hoping it might bring the baby some comfort. When JD returned, he found Eli gently rocking the infants, his eyes distant as he hummed a quiet lullaby. JD set the tray down, moving slowly to avoid startling him. "I got you some food," JD said softly, handing Eli the cup of hot cocoa. "Take your time. And don't worry about anything here. You're safe." Eli looked at the cup, hesitant, but the warm smell of chocolate seemed to ease his tension. He took a cautious sip, then glanced up at JD, who gave him an encouraging smile. After a few sips, Eli set the cup down, his fingers still wrapped protectively around the babies. JD waited, giving him time to find his words. Finally, Eli spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I couldn't leave them. I had to keep them safe." He paused, looking down at the infants with a tenderness that spoke of weeks, perhaps months, of caring for them alone. "Emma and Elijah. They're all I have left." JD leaned forward, his tone gentle. "Can you tell me what happened, Eli? Why you had to leave?" Eli hesitated, his eyes shifting as if searching for something only he could see. When he looked up again, there was a flicker of pain and anger in his gaze. "We were at Willow Home," Eli said slowly, as though the words hurt to form. It's supposed to be a place for kids who don't have anyone. But it's not a home. Not for kids like us." JD's jaw tightened, but he kept his face calm, his eyes on Eli, waiting. "They keep us in different rooms, and they treat Emma and Elijah like they don't matter. They say things about—" Eli trailed off, biting his lip hard enough that JD saw the skin break. "When I tried to help them, the lady who runs it, Miss Hunter, she'd lock us in a room, this tiny dark room where it's freezing cold. She said we had to learn discipline." JD felt anger burn within him, but he forced himself to remain composed. "That sounds terrible, Eli. How long has this been going on?" Eli's eyes filled with tears, but he blinked them back, his voice steady. "For as long as I've been there. I didn't know how bad it was at first. But when Emma and Elijah came, they were so little, and she didn't care if they were hungry or crying. She just ignored them, JD, like they weren't even there. I couldn't let them stay there. Not after everything." JD leaned closer, his voice low and calm. "You were so brave, Eli. You did exactly what a big brother should do. And now, I'm here to help you all. We're going to make sure you're safe, and we're going to find out everything that happened at Willow Home." Just then, Lena entered with a bag of supplies. She smiled gently at Eli and set the bag down, kneeling beside him. "Hi, Eli. I'm Officer Lena. I brought some formula and diapers for the babies." Eli gave her a small nod, his fingers visibly relaxing around the babies. JD watched as Lena quietly prepared a bottle, handing it to Eli, who took it with a look of relief. As Eli fed Emma, JD leaned back, his mind racing. This was more than just a neglected child. It was a system that had failed, a place meant to protect yet harboring hidden horrors. He knew he couldn't solve this alone. "Eli," JD said gently, "do you mind if I call someone who might be able to help too? She's a friend of mine, and she's really good at helping kids and families." Eli nodded slowly, his eyes flickering with a cautious hope. JD stood, pulling his phone from his pocket and dialing the number of Rebecca Stanton, a child advocate he'd worked with before. She was fierce, compassionate, and exactly the person JD needed on his side. When Rebecca arrived, her warm, reassuring presence filled the room. She approached Eli with a gentle smile, sitting across from him. "Hi, Eli," she greeted softly. "My name's Rebecca. JD told me a little bit about you and your brother and sister. I'm here to make sure you all stay safe. Can I ask you a few questions?" Eli nodded, his body relaxing slightly. Rebecca's voice had a soothing quality, and JD could see the boy's walls starting to come down, bit by bit. Rebecca listened patiently as Eli described life at Willow Home. She asked questions with gentle curiosity, never pressing too hard, allowing him to share as much or as little as he wanted. And with each word Eli spoke, JD felt his heart break a little more. When Eli finally finished, Rebecca looked at him with admiration. "You're an incredible big brother, Eli," she said sincerely. "What you did for Emma and Elijah took so much courage. And now, it's our turn to help you." Eli looked up, his eyes wide with gratitude. He opened his mouth to say something, but his words were lost in a quiet sob. JD's chest tightened as he watched the boy crumble, his carefully built walls finally giving way. JD moved closer, placing a comforting hand on Eli's shoulder as he cried. "You don't have to be brave on your own anymore, Eli," JD said softly. "We're here now, and we're going to make sure you're all okay." After a few minutes, Eli wiped his tears away, his expression a mix of relief and exhaustion. JD could see the weight lifting, the fear slowly melting as trust began to take its place. Rebecca reached into her bag, pulling out a small notepad and pen. "Now, Eli, I'd like to make sure we know everything that happened at Willow Home so we can make sure no other child goes through this. Would you be okay telling me everything, even the little details?" Eli nodded, his voice stronger now. "I want to help. I want to make sure no one else gets hurt there. Especially not Emma and Elijah." With steady patience, Rebecca began documenting Eli's story, and JD stayed close by, watching over them like a silent guardian. He knew this was only the beginning of a long journey, but he was determined to see it through. As the sun began to set outside, JD felt a sense of renewed purpose. He had seen hardship before, but this was different. He wasn't just fighting for justice, he was fighting for a family, for the chance to give 3 children the love and security they deserved. And as Eli finished sharing his story, JD made a silent promise to himself. He would do whatever it took to protect them, no matter how long or difficult the path ahead might be. Shadows of Willow Home. The next morning, JD found himself back in his patrol car, parked just down the street from Willow Home. The orphanage was a drab, 2-story brick building with a faded sign hanging above the door. From the outside, it looked almost abandoned, as if the years had sapped the life out of the place. JD felt a sense of dread looking at the cracked windows and overgrown weeds along the front walkway. This was the place that Eli had followed with his 2 tiny siblings in tow. As he sat there, his mind ran over the events of the previous night. Eli's story played in his mind like a recording, the fear and pain in the boy's voice haunting him. JD knew that what he'd heard was just the surface. He had to dig deeper. He took a steadying breath and exited his car. His resolve hardened. He wouldn't leave until he had answers. Inside the orphanage, he was met with silence. The receptionist at the front desk, a young woman who looked barely out of high school, greeted him with an uncertain smile. "Good morning, officer. How can I help you?" she asked, her eyes flicking nervously to his badge. "I'm Officer Daniels," he replied, maintaining a neutral tone. "I'm here to speak with Miss Hunter. Is she in?" The receptionist's face fell, her hands fidgeting as she reached for the phone. "I'll see if she's available. She usually doesn't take visitors without an appointment." JD gave her a nod, watching as she punched a number into the phone with shaky hands. Moments later, she glanced up, visibly relieved. "Ms. Hunter will see you in her office. Down the hall, 2nd door on the left." JD thanked her and made his way down the dim corridor. The hallway smelled of antiseptic, the kind used to cover up years of neglect. Framed black and white photographs lined the walls, showing groups of unsmiling children dressed in outdated clothing. JD noted the dust collecting on the frames and the faint scratches on the floor, which suggested children had been scolded for not being careful enough. When he reached Ms. Hunter's office, he took a moment to steel himself before knocking. "Come in," a voice called from within. JD entered to find Ms. Hunter sitting behind a large oak desk piled with stacks of papers. She was a middle-aged woman with a sharp gaze and tightly pulled back hair. Everything about her posture was rigid, as though she were constantly holding herself in check. "Officer Daniels," she greeted him, her tone cool but professional. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" JD maintained a polite expression as he took a seat across from her. "I'm here regarding a boy named Eli and his 2 siblings, Emma and Elijah. They recently came into our care, and I'd like to clarify a few details about their time here." Ms. Hunter's expression shifted ever so slightly, her mouth tightening at the corners. Yes, Eli and the twins. I'm aware they've been missing for a few days now. Such a shame, really, but Eli was always a difficult child. Independent, stubborn, prone to mischief." JD's gaze didn't waver as he observed her, picking up on the subtle hints of irritation in her voice. "From what I've gathered, Eli seemed to feel a deep sense of responsibility for his siblings. Would you say he had any reason to believe they weren't safe here?" Ms. Hunter's eyes narrowed, and a fleeting hardness crossed her face. "Children can be dramatic, officer. Eli, in particular, had quite the imagination. He tended to exaggerate things, especially when it came to the other children. I run a strict but fair facility. Structure and discipline are crucial for children like him." GD's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice level. "From what I understand, Eli described being locked in a dark room as a form of punishment. Can you confirm whether or not such measures are used here?" Miss Hunter's expression soured. "As I said, Officer, Eli has a vivid imagination. I can assure you, we don't engage in any practices that aren't approved by state regulations. But if a child misbehaves, there are consequences. Rules must be followed for the sake of order." JD's eyes sharpened. "And who determines the nature of these consequences?" Miss Hunter's smile was brittle, her gaze fixed coldly on him. "That would be me, Officer. I have over 15 years of experience managing Willow Home. I know what it takes to maintain control and ensure these children learn respect. Some, more than others." The way she said "some" struck a nerve in JD. He had dealt with people like her before, those who hid behind authority, using it as a shield to justify their own actions. He sensed that Miss Hunter was more than just strict. She was someone who enjoyed wielding power over the vulnerable. JD gave her a curt nod, rising from his chair. "Thank you for your time, Miss Hunter. I'll be in touch if I have further questions." As he walked back down the hallway, JD felt his anger simmering just beneath the surface. He couldn't shake the feeling that Miss Hunter was hiding something, that there were shadows lurking within this place, unseen but very real. But without more concrete evidence, he couldn't take action yet. Later that afternoon, JD met Rebecca Stanton in the park near the station. She was leaning against a bench, a cup of coffee in her hand, watching the children playing on the swings. "Did you find anything?" she asked as JD approached. He shook his head, frustration etched in his features. "Miss Hunter's good at hiding whatever's going on there. But something's wrong, Rebecca. She talked about Eli like he was a nuisance, not a child. And the way she described him, it's like she thinks she has the right to decide who matters and who doesn't." Rebecca's face darkened. "I've heard stories about places like Willow Home. People who don't see children as individuals but as burdens, especially if they're different in any way." JD took a deep breath, steadying himself. "We need to find a way to get inside, to see things as they really are. Eli's story, it's more than just neglect. I think there's real harm happening in that place." Rebecca nodded, her expression resolute. "I'll see if I can pull some strings. Maybe bring in a social worker for an unannounced inspection. And I'll reach out to other children who've been through Willow Home. If there's a pattern of mistreatment, we'll find it." JD felt a surge of relief. "Thank you, Rebecca. Eli and those babies deserve justice. I promised him I'd protect them, and I'm not backing down." Rebecca placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "I know you won't, and I'll be right there with you." That evening, JD returned home to find his wife, Sarah, sitting on the couch, reading a story to Eli and the babies. She had agreed without hesitation when JD asked if they could stay with them for a while, even as he conducted his investigation. Sarah was a high school English teacher, and her gentle nature had already begun to work wonders on Eli. JD watched from the doorway as Sarah finished the story, her voice soft and soothing. When she closed the book, Eli looked up at her with wide, grateful eyes. "Thank you, Miss Sarah," he murmured, hugging the book to his chest. Sarah smiled, reaching out to brush a lock of hair from his face. "You don't have to thank me, Eli. You're welcome here anytime." As Sarah stood to put the book away, JD stepped into the room, taking the seat next to Eli. The boy glanced up at him, his expression thoughtful. "You went to Willow Home, didn't you?" Eli asked quietly. JD nodded, his voice gentle. "I did. I wanted to see if Miss Hunter had anything to say about you and your brother and sister, but it seems like she's hiding the truth." Eli's face hardened, and JD saw a flicker of anger in the boy's eyes. "She doesn't care about us. She cares about keeping control." JD placed a reassuring hand on Eli's shoulder. "I believe you, Eli, and I'm going to do everything I can to make sure she never hurts anyone again." Eli relaxed slightly, his trust in JD growing stronger. He gave a small nod, his gaze fixed on the floor. "Thank you," he whispered. "No one's ever listened before. It's like we didn't even matter." JD's heart ached as he listened, realizing the depth of the scars Eli carried. This boy had been let down by adults his entire life, but here he was, willing to trust again, even after everything he'd endured. "You matter more than you know, Eli," JD said, his voice firm. "And I'm going to prove it to you." Eli looked up, his expression a mix of hope and disbelief. For a moment, JD could see the glimmer of a smile, a flicker of the child that Eli had never been allowed to be. "Now," JD said with a grin, ruffling Eli's hair, "how about some dinner? Sarah's made spaghetti, and I don't know about you, but I'm starving." Eli nodded, and for the first time since JD had found him, he seemed to truly relax, allowing himself to feel safe in the warmth of JD and Sarah's home. Over the next few days, JD and Rebecca worked tirelessly, gathering testimonies and records from past residents of Willow Home. The stories were heart-wrenching. Children describing the cold, dark rooms they were locked in, the harsh punishments, and the feeling of being invisible. Bit by bit, a case began to build, the pieces falling into place like a dark puzzle. JD knew it was only a matter of time before he could bring justice to Eli and his siblings, and every other child who had been hurt by Miss Hunter's cruelty. And through it all, Eli remained with JD and Sarah, the faint spark of hope growing stronger in his eyes each day. He was beginning to understand that he wasn't alone anymore, that there were people who cared, who were willing to fight for him. As the sun set one evening, JD sat with Eli on the porch, watching the colors fade from the sky. "You know, Eli," JD said quietly, "family doesn't always mean people who share your blood. Sometimes, it's the people who stand by you, no matter what." Eli looked up, his gaze filled with gratitude. "Does that mean you're my family now?" JD smiled, pulling him close. "Yeah, Eli, that's exactly what it means." Breaking through the walls. The next morning, JD found himself once again consumed by the mounting evidence against Willow Home. His mind swirled with testimonies, inspection reports, and troubling anecdotes that painted a grim picture of the orphanage Eli and his siblings had fled from. Each new detail added to the weight pressing down on JD's heart, solidifying his resolve to bring justice to the children who had suffered there. Rebecca called him early, her tone serious. "JD, I've set up a meeting with the head of Child Protective Services. They've agreed to a surprise inspection tomorrow morning." JD's relief was palpable. "That's good news, Rebecca. Between the testimonies and this inspection, I think we might have what we need to take her down." Rebecca hesitated, then lowered her voice. "There's something you should know, JD. I received an anonymous tip last night from someone claiming to have worked at Willow Home years ago. They said Miss Hunter has been known to falsify records to cover up incidents, especially when it involves the kids she doesn't like." JD's grip on the phone tightened. "What do you mean by the kids she doesn't like?" Rebecca's voice was cold with anger. "The children who don't look like her. The children like Emma and Elijah." JD closed his eyes, his chest heavy with rage. He had seen this kind of hate before, hidden behind respectable facades. It never failed to disgust him. But now it was personal. Now it involved the children he had promised to protect. "We're taking her down, Rebecca," JD said, his voice filled with resolve. "Whatever it takes, this ends now." Later that evening, JD returned home to find Eli in the living room, playing on the floor with Emma and Elijah. They had started to settle in, the fear that had once haunted Eli's eyes beginning to fade. But JD could tell there were still shadows, hidden deep within the boy's heart. "Hey, buddy," JD greeted, sitting down on the couch nearby. "How are you doing?" Eli looked up, offering a small smile. "Good, I think. It's nice here." JD smiled, his heart warming at the boy's tentative trust. "I'm glad to hear that, Eli. You know, you and your brother and sister, you're welcome here as long as you need. You don't have to worry about going back to Willow Home. Not ever." Eli's face softened, and he hugged Emma close to his chest, a look of relief washing over him. "Thank you, JD. I didn't think anyone would care." JD placed a comforting hand on Eli's shoulder. "You're a brave kid, Eli. You took care of your family when no one else would, and you did an amazing job. But now you don't have to do it alone." They sat together in silence for a few moments, watching Emma and Elijah as they giggled and babbled on the floor. JD could see the beginnings of happiness blooming in them, a brightness that had been missing when they first arrived. "JD," Eli's voice was small, hesitant. Do you think we could ever have a real home? Like with a mom and dad who want us?" JD's heart ached at the question, the depth of Eli's longing clear in his voice. "I think you deserve that, Eli. And I know that somewhere out there, there's a family who would love nothing more than to have you and your siblings as their own." Eli glanced at JD, his eyes filled with a mixture of hope and doubt. "Could that family be you and Sarah?" The question caught JD off guard, but he kept his expression gentle, not wanting to overwhelm Eli. "You know, Eli, Sarah, and we'd be honored to have you in our family. But it's a big decision, and we want you to feel comfortable here first. This is your home for as long as you need it." Eli's face softened, and for the first time, JD saw a flicker of true hope in the boy's eyes. "I'd like that," Eli whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I think I'd like that a lot." JD ruffled Eli's hair, feeling the warmth spread through him. He had taken on a responsibility greater than he had ever anticipated, but he knew in his heart that this was exactly where he was meant to be. The following morning, JD joined Rebecca and a team of social workers as they pulled up to Willow Home for the unannounced inspection. Ms. Hunter's face twisted in surprise when she opened the door, her thin lips pulling into a tight, forced smile. "Good morning, Officer Daniels," she greeted, her tone tense. "I wasn't expecting visitors." JD returned her smile with a polite nod. "Good morning, Miss Hunter. We're here to conduct a routine inspection, and we'd appreciate your cooperation." Miss Hunter's eyes flickered with something dark, but she maintained her composed demeanor. "Of course," she replied, gesturing for them to enter. "Please, make yourselves at home." As they moved through the orphanage, JD noticed how Miss Hunter's eyes followed them closely, her hands clenching and unclenching at her sides. He could see the tension in her posture, the barely concealed rage simmering beneath the surface. Rebecca and her team inspected every room, documenting everything meticulously. They noted the worn and broken furniture, the cold and unwelcoming atmosphere, and the lack of personal items for the children. JD felt his stomach churn as he took in the bleak surroundings, realizing just how much Eli and the other children had endured in this place. Finally, they'd reached the basement, where Ms. Hunter hesitated, her face tightening with reluctance. There's nothing down here," she stammered, her voice wavering. "It's just a storage area." JD crossed his arms, fixing her with a stern gaze. "We'd like to see it anyway, Miss Hunter." Miss Hunter's expression soured, but she nodded, leading them down the narrow staircase. The basement was dark and damp, the air thick with the smell of mildew. JD's flashlight illuminated the walls, revealing faint scratches and marks that told a haunting story. Rebecca moved to a small door in the corner of the basement, reaching for the handle. But Miss Hunter's hand shot out, blocking her. "There's nothing in there," she said sharply, her voice cold. JD stepped forward, his voice firm. "Miss Hunter, please step aside." She glared at him, but there was a flicker of fear in her eyes. Reluctantly, she moved back, allowing Rebecca to open the door. Inside, they found a small windowless room with bare walls and a concrete floor. A single light bulb hung from the ceiling, casting a harsh, sterile glow over the space. JD's heart twisted as he took in the barren room, realizing that this was the dark room Eli had described, the place where he had been punished, alone and terrified. "This room will be included in our report," Rebecca said, her voice steady but filled with disgust. "We'll also be conducting interviews with the children to document any further incidents of mistreatment." Miss Hunter's face turned a deep shade of red, her mouth opening and closing as she struggled for words. "This is an outrage," she finally spat. "I have dedicated my life to helping these children, and this is how you repay me." JD stepped forward, his voice calm but unyielding. "No, Miss Hunter, you failed these children, and now we're here to make sure they get the justice they deserve." As they made their way back upstairs, Ms. Hunter's composure crumbled, her true nature spilling out in a stream of angry muttering and hateful glances. JD felt a surge of satisfaction, knowing that her reign over Willow Home was nearing its end. That evening, back at home, JD gathered Eli, Emma, and Elijah in the living room, sitting them down on the couch. Sarah sat beside him, her hand resting on his, a supportive presence that grounded him. "I have some good news," JD began, smiling at Eli. "Thanks to you, we were able to find out what's really happening at Willow Home. Ms. Hunter won't be able to hurt anyone else ever again." Eli's face lit up with a mixture of relief and joy. Does that mean we're safe now?" JD nodded, reaching out to gently squeeze Eli's shoulder. "Yes, Eli, you're safe, and no matter what happens, I promise you, no one will take you or your siblings back there." Tears filled Eli's eyes, and he hugged Emma and Elijah close, a soft smile on his face. "Thank you, JD," he whispered, his voice filled with gratitude. "Thank you for everything." JD felt a warmth spread through him, a sense of fulfillment that went beyond words. He had fought for these children, and he had won. But more than that, he had given them hope, a chance to rebuild their lives free from fear. As the evening wore on, JD and Sarah shared a quiet moment together after the children had gone to bed. They sat together on the porch, watching the stars twinkle in the clear night sky. "We did it," Sarah said softly, resting her head on JD's shoulder. "We saved them." JD nodded, his heart full of gratitude. "And now they have a chance to be part of a real family. I think I'd want to make that official." Sarah looked up at him, her eyes shining. "You mean you want to adopt them?" JD smiled, his gaze filled with love. "Yeah, I think they belong here with us, and I think they know it too." Sarah hugged him tightly, her voice thick with emotion. "Then let's make it happen. Let's give them the family they deserve." In that moment, JD felt a profound sense of purpose. He had dedicated his life to helping others. But this was different. This was family, and he would protect it with everything he had. As they sat together beneath the stars, JD knew that this was only the beginning of their journey. There would be challenges, obstacles to overcome, but he was ready. He had fought for Eli, Emma, and Elijah, and he would continue to fight for them, no matter what lay ahead. The bonds of family. The days following Miss Hunter's exposure and removal from Willow Home were a whirlwind. JD and Sarah had begun the early stages of the adoption process for Eli, Emma, and Elijah, navigating a maze of paperwork, social services meetings, and home evaluations. Every step brought both excitement and anxiety, as they knew the journey to adopt these children wouldn't be easy. But JD and Sarah were determined, more resolute than ever, to give Eli and his siblings the life and love they deserved. One chilly autumn afternoon, JD and Sarah sat on their living room couch, a stack of paperwork spread across the coffee table. Eli was in the next room, playing a quiet game of hide-and-seek with Emma and Elijah, their laughter and soft footsteps bringing a warmth to the house that JD and Sarah had longed for. Sarah glanced up from a particularly lengthy form, a slight frown creasing her forehead. "Did you ever think we'd be here, JD?" fighting to adopt 3 kids who were once strangers to us. JD smiled, reaching over to squeeze her hand. Honestly, no. But it feels right. Like this is exactly where we're meant to be. Sarah's expression softened, and she glanced toward the doorway where Eli's laughter drifted in. They bring so much life here. It's hard to imagine the house without them now. GT nodded, his gaze thoughtful. You know, when I found Eli in that alley with the babies, I saw something in him. Something fierce and protective. I knew he would do anything for them, no matter the cost. I think that's why I feel such a connection to him. He's got a good heart, and he just needs a place where he can feel safe. Sarah smiled, wiping a tear that had crept down her cheek. Then let's make this happen, JD. Let's be that safe place for them. The next morning, JD took Eli on a drive, a tradition he had started in the weeks since they had arrived. JD wanted to make sure that Eli knew he could rely on him, not only as a father figure, but as a friend. They didn't always talk about heavy topics on these drives. Sometimes they would just go for ice cream or walk by the lake. But today, JD felt a conversation brewing, something he had wanted to ask Eli for a while. As they drove through town, Eli watched the scenery pass by, his eyes bright and curious. JD sensed that Eli was coming to understand the possibility of a real permanent home, but he could also see the remnants of fear that lingered in his guarded expressions. Eli, JD began, keeping his tone casual, I know we've been talking a lot about making you, Emma, and Elijah part of our family. How do you feel about that? Eli was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on the passing trees. I think I'd really like that. But his voice trailed off, uncertainty creeping in. JD glanced over, offering him a gentle smile. But Eli shifted in his seat, his fingers twisting together nervously. I don't want to mess things up. What if I'm not good enough to be part of a family? JD felt his heart clench at the vulnerability in Eli's voice. He pulled the car over to the side of the road, turning to face him fully. Eli, he said softly, you are already a part of our family. You, Emma, and Elijah, you belong with us, and nothing you could ever do would change that. Families aren't about being perfect. They're about loving each other, no matter what. Eli's eyes filled with tears, and he quickly wiped them away, embarrassed. You really mean that? JD nodded, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. Absolutely. And we're going to make this official, but only if it's what you want. You get to choose, too. Eli looked down, his expression thoughtful. Finally, he nodded, his voice steady. I want it, JD. I want to be part of a family, with you and Sarah. JD felt a surge of joy and relief, his heart swelling with pride. Then that's what we'll do, Eli. We're all in this together. Back at the house, Sarah had prepared a special dinner to celebrate the first milestone in the adoption process, the submission of their preliminary paperwork to family services. As they gathered around the table, Sarah placed a homemade lasagna in the center, her face alight with excitement. Tonight, we're celebrating our first big step toward becoming a family, she announced, her eyes shining as she looked at each of the kids. We may have some challenges ahead, but I want you to know that we're here for you, every step of the way. Eli looked at Sarah, a soft smile spreading across his face as he took in the warmth of her words. Emma, perched in her high chair, clapped her tiny hands in delight, while Elijah, a little less expressive, merely looked on with a curious gaze. JD raised his glass, filled with sparkling apple juice, and smiled. To new beginnings, and to the family we're building together. They clinked their glasses, and for the first time, JD felt the room fill with the kind of love and joy that only family could bring. Eli's laughter echoed through the room, and JD saw the hope and trust beginning to take root in the young boy's heart. But as the adoption process moved forward, JG and Sarah encountered their first major obstacle. A caseworker from Family Services, Marlene Havers, arrived at their home one chilly afternoon, clipboard in hand, and an unreadable expression on her face. Marlene was known for her strict adherence to rules and a reputation for being skeptical of complicated adoptions, especially those involving older children. Officer Daniels, Ms. Daniels, Marlene greeted them formally as they welcomed her into their living room. "I'm here to conduct the preliminary evaluation for Eli, Emma, and Elijah's placement with you. I must warn you that I have high standards, especially given the history of these children." JD's jaw tightened, but he kept his tone respectful. "We understand, Ms. Havers. We want what's best for the kids, and we're prepared to meet any requirements you set." Marlene gave him a curt nod, then turned to Eli, who was sitting quietly on the couch with Emma and Elijah. She studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. "Eli," she began, her voice cool, "how do you feel about living with Officer Daniels and Ms. Daniels? Do you like it here?" Eli glanced at JD, seeking reassurance, and JD gave him a slight nod, encouraging him to speak honestly. I like it here," Eli said softly, his voice filled with sincerity. "They take care of me and my brother and sister. They make us feel safe." Marlene's gaze didn't soften, but she made a note on her clipboard, her pen scratching across the paper. "I see. And do you feel comfortable? Do you think they're able to provide for you and meet your needs?" Eli nodded, his face earnest. "Yes. They're kind, and they make sure we have everything we need. Gigi even takes me for drives to talk. I feel like I can trust him." Marlene pursed her lips, her expression still unyielding. "Thank you, Eli. That will be all for now." As she turned back to JD and Sarah, her tone grew even more formal. "I appreciate the care you're giving these children, but I need to inform you that the state will be conducting a thorough background check and a series of home visits over the next few months. These children have been through traumatic experiences, and we must ensure that their placement is in their best interest." Sarah's face fell slightly, but JD placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We're prepared for that, Ms. Havers. We'll do whatever it takes." Marlene nodded, but her gaze lingered on Eli, her expression distant. "Good. Then I'll be in touch." After she left, Eli looked up at JD, his eyes filled with worry. Do you think she'll let us stay?" JD knelt down, meeting Eli's gaze. "Hey, don't worry about Ms. Havers. Sarah and I are here for you, and we're not giving up. No matter what happens, we're going to fight for you." Eli relaxed, a small smile returning to his face. "Okay, I believe you." Over the following months, JD and Sarah dedicated themselves to the adoption process, meeting every requirement that Marlene Havers and Family Services set. They attended parenting classes, child welfare seminars, and even signed up for trauma-informed care training to better understand Eli's needs. Despite the challenges, they made a point to keep life as normal as possible for Eli, Emma, and Elijah. They celebrated birthdays with homemade cakes, went on family outings to the local park, and spent quiet evenings reading bedtime stories. One chilly December afternoon, JD took Eli to the park to play soccer, their breath visible in the crisp air as they kicked the ball back and forth. After a while, they sat on a bench, taking a break. "JD," Eli began, his voice hesitant, "why are you and Sarah going through so much trouble to keep us?" JD looked at him, surprised by the question. "Because you're worth it, Eli. You, Emma, and Elijah. You're family to us. Family means sticking together, even when it's hard." Eli looked down, his face thoughtful. "I never thought I'd have a family again. I thought people like Miss Hunter were all there was." JD placed a comforting hand on Eli's shoulder. "I know it's been hard, Eli, but I want you to know that there are people who care about you, people who want to see you happy and safe. You don't have to go through life alone anymore." Eli's eyes filled with tears, and he looked away, embarrassed. But JD gently turned him back, his voice soft. "It's okay to let people in, Eli. You're not alone." In that moment, Eli leaned into GD's side, his small frame relaxing as he allowed himself to feel the warmth and safety he had been deprived of for so long. GD wrapped an arm around him, holding him close, knowing that this was what family was all about, providing comfort and security, even in the hardest of times. A forever home. It was a cold, bright January morning when GD and Sarah stood in the courthouse lobby, hands clasped tightly together. Beside them, Eli clutched a toy truck nervously, while Emma and Elijah napped in their stroller, wrapped up in cozy blankets. This day had felt like a distant dream only a few months ago, yet here they were, waiting for the final hearing that would decide whether JD and Sarah could officially adopt Eli and his siblings. JD glanced down at Eli, offering a reassuring smile. "You doing okay, buddy?" Eli looked up, his face a mix of excitement and anxiety. "Yeah. I hope they let us stay." Sarah knelt down beside him, smoothing out his jacket. "You've already got a home with us, Eli. Today's just a formality." Marlene Havers, the caseworker from Family Services, walked up to them, her clipboard in hand. Over the past few months, JD and Sarah had grown to appreciate her diligence and her attention to detail, though her initial skepticism had been challenging. But as the weeks passed, and she saw JD and Sarah's unwavering dedication to Eli and his siblings, her attitude had softened. "Good morning, Officer Daniels, Ms. Daniels," Marlene greeted them, her tone respectful. She looked at Eli, her eyes softening. "And how are you feeling today, Eli?" Eli managed a small smile. "Good, I think." Marlene nodded, and JD saw a flicker of warmth in her expression. "You've been very brave, Eli. Today's just a chance for the judge to get to know you all a little better." Just then, the courtroom doors opened, and they were led inside, JD's heart pounding as they took their seats in the quiet room. The judge, a kindly woman with graying hair and a gentle smile, sat behind the bench, her gaze falling on the small family before her. After a few preliminary questions, she turned her attention to Eli, her voice warm and inviting. "Eli, I understand you've had quite a journey to get here. Can you tell me how you feel about living with JD and Sarah?" Eli looked down, his fingers nervously twisting in his lap. JD could see the boy's anxiety rising, so he placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, giving him a small nod of encouragement. Eli took a deep breath, looking up at the judge with determined eyes. I feel safe with them," he said, his voice clear but soft. "They take care of me and my brother and sister. And they don't get mad like other people did. They're kind to us, and they make us feel like we're part of a family." The judge nodded thoughtfully, her gaze shifting to JD and Sarah. "And you both understand the responsibilities that come with adopting these children, not only to provide for them, but to support them emotionally and help them heal from past traumas." JD felt the weight of her words, but he nodded with unwavering resolve. "Yes, Your Honor. We understand, and we're fully committed to doing whatever it takes to give Eli, Emma, and Elijah a safe and loving home." Sarah echoed JD's sentiments, her voice filled with emotion. "We already consider them our family, Your Honor. This process is just making it official." The judge studied them for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. Finally, she smiled, her gaze softening as she looked at Eli, then Emma and Elijah. "In my time on the bench, I've seen many families come and go, but rarely have I seen one with as much love and dedication as yours. It is my privilege to grant this adoption and officially recognize Eli, Emma, and Elijah as the children of JD and Sarah Daniels." The words settled over them like a gentle snowfall, filling the room with a profound sense of joy and relief. JD felt Sarah squeeze his hand, her face lighting up with happiness, and he glanced down to see tears shimmering in Eli's eyes. The judge handed Eli a certificate, a formal document bearing his new full name, Eli Daniels. He looked at it in awe, his small hands tracing the letters, a smile breaking across his face. "Welcome home, Eli," JD whispered, pulling him into a hug. "Welcome home." The weeks following the adoption were filled with joyful moments as JD and Sarah adapted to life as a family of 5. They celebrated their first official family dinner, complete with Eli's favorite meal of spaghetti and meatballs, which Sarah had learned to make just the way he liked it. Emma and Elijah quickly grew attached to Sarah's bedtime lullabies, and Eli began to explore new interests, encouraged by JD's patient guidance and support. One evening, as the family gathered in the living room, Sarah handed Eli a scrapbook she had been working on for him, filled with photos and mementos from their time together. "This is for you, Eli," Sarah said, her voice warm. "I wanted you to have a place to keep all your memories. Every happy moment, every adventure. We're going to fill it up together." Eli opened the book, his eyes wide as he looked at the photos inside. There were pictures of his first trip to the lake with JD, of Emma and Elijah's first Christmas with their new family, and even a few snapshots of everyday moments. JD teaching him how to throw a football, Sarah helping him bake cookies. As Eli flipped through the pages, he came to a section labeled Future Adventures. It was blank, filled with empty slots just waiting to be filled with new memories. He looked up at Sarah, his eyes glistening. "We're going to fill this up, right?" he asked softly. Sarah smiled, reaching over to ruffle his hair. "Oh, you better believe it, Eli. This is just the beginning." One sunny Saturday, JD decided to take Eli on a special outing, just the two of them. As they drove through town, Eli looked out the window, his curiosity piqued. "Where are we going, JD?" he asked, a hint of excitement in his voice. JD grinned, keeping his gaze on the road. "You'll see. It's a surprise." They pulled up to a local community center, where a group of kids were gathered outside, kicking around a soccer ball. Eli's eyes lit up as he took in the sight, recognizing the game he had always wanted to learn. JD parked the car and turned to Eli. "I signed you up for soccer practice, buddy. Figured it was time you tried something new." Eli's face broke into a huge smile, and he jumped out of the car, barely able to contain his excitement. "Really? I get to play?" JD nodded, chuckling. "Yep, and I'll be right here, cheering you on." Eli ran over to join the other kids, his face glowing with happiness. JD watched him with a deep sense of pride, knowing that Eli was finally beginning to experience the simple joys of childhood that he had missed out on for so long. As the practice unfolded, Eli's natural athleticism began to shine. JD cheered him on from the sidelines, his heart swelling with pride each time Eli kicked the ball or made a pass. When practice ended, Eli ran over to JD, breathless and beaming. "Did you see, JG? I did it. I actually played," Eli exclaimed, his eyes shining with excitement. JD pulled him into a hug, laughing. "You sure did, buddy. And you did great." On the drive home, Eli was quiet, lost in thought. JD glanced over, sensing that the boy had something on his mind. "What's up, Eli?" he asked gently. Eli looked up, a soft smile on his face. I never thought I'd get to do stuff like this. Play soccer, have a family. I didn't think it was possible." JD felt a lump in his throat, and he reached over, placing a comforting hand on Eli's shoulder. "You deserve all of it, Eli. And from now on, you're going to have all the chances in the world to do whatever you dream of." Eli smiled, his eyes filled with a quiet joy. "Thank you, JD, for everything." That night, as JD and Sarah tucked the children into bed, Eli reached out to them, his voice hesitant. Can I call you Mom and Dad now?" he asked, his face hopeful. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, and she nodded, her voice thick with emotion. "Of course, Eli. We'd love that." JD felt his heart swell with pride and love, and he leaned down, pulling Eli into a gentle hug. You're our son, Eli, and we're so proud of you." Eli wrapped his arms around them, his face buried in JD's shoulder as he whispered, "I love you, Mom and Dad." As they left his room, JD and Sarah shared a quiet moment together in the hallway, the weight of their journey settling over them. They had fought so hard to bring this family together, and now they finally felt whole. In the coming months, their lives were filled with new experiences and challenges, but each one brought them closer as a family. Eli's scrapbook grew thicker, filled with photos of his soccer games, family picnics, and quiet moments spent together at home. Emma and Elijah blossomed, their laughter and playfulness filling the house with warmth and joy. One evening, as they gathered around the dinner table, JD looked at his family, his heart full of gratitude. He had spent years serving his community, but this family, this was his greatest accomplishment, his truest calling. To family, JD said, raising his glass in a toast. To new beginnings and to all the adventures yet to come. They clinked their glasses, laughter filling the room as they celebrated the life they had built together. And as JD looked around the table, he knew that this was only the beginning of the incredible journey they would share.